Well, hey there, senior leader, and welcome to the Talent Sherpa podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Lynch, and today I am joined by Scott Morris, my friend, a former CHRO with the scar tissue to prove it. He's moved into an entrepreneurial world now where he leads Propulsion AI. And today we're going to talk about something that everyone knows, but probably doesn't really define very well, and that is culture. And before you say, okay, this is not something I want to be listening to, I think you're going to find that as a couple of folks that have been in the trenches before, we might have a different take on it. So let's first start, Scott, with what do you think culture is? How do you define it?
Yeah, and here's the problem with it, man. I know you've lived this the same that I have. Everybody uses this word, and they use it for everything. I think the far end of my hatred for the word is when we start to associate it with stuff like beanbags and foosball tables and stocked refrigerators and stuff like that, because that's not culture. And then, the other end of my hatred is when we start using it to indicate satisfaction. Everybody's got a different definition, but the easiest one I've ever found is it's an ingrained understanding of how you are expected to behave. And if you don't mind, let me tell just a quick story to try and cap this. I grew up in the state of California. And in the state of California, one of the behaviors that is really normal when you are driving a car is if you are at a left turn arrow intersection, you pull the car into the intersection if you are the first car. And the reason you do that is because there's a ton of cars and everybody needs to get through that light. And when I came to Colorado, where I live now, I found very quickly that is not how people drive. And so I constantly, to this day, find myself at left turn arrow intersections yelling at the first car to move into the intersection. And the reason I think that story is significant is my anger in that situation is caused because of a difference between my expectation and reality. And that's why culture is so important, because expectations have to meet reality and people have to know confidently what they're supposed to do when they don't have somebody telling them what to do.
Yeah, first off, your anger issues, the employee assistance program, if you have one
Thank
in
you.
your company,
I
you
need that.
get some help with it. Yeah, and I was thinking about when I was in Maryland for the first time, and during rush hour, everyone is driving on the side lane, and it's just like this is cognitive dissonance. I don't know what to do. But the question for me, coming back to what you shared, is I love the concept. Culture is what you do or supposed to do when no one is looking.
Yeah, right.
Is there a so that that we can attach to it? Because I think sometimes we have definitions and values and stuff we put up on the walls, and they look really good and fancy, but they don't necessarily translate to what we're trying to accomplish. Love your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I think the so that is, and I think there's not just one so that. I think there are a lot of so that's. You want people to have an ingrained understanding of how they're expected to behave because it makes them more productive. If people have to sit around, if they have to hesitate, if they have to wonder what they're supposed to do, that is not operating at optimum productivity. That's one end of the spectrum. The other is about their engagement level. And ideally, we want a workforce that has high productivity and high engagement at the same time. And if you are unsure about how you're going to get rewarded, and I don't mean like physical rewards, and I don't mean raises, I mean pats on the back from your boss for doing things in a certain way at a certain time, sometimes with permission, sometimes without permission. If you're not confident about that, your engagement can't be high. And we know the impact that engagement has on the financial performance of the organization. So I think that's the so that for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was at the Frito-Lay organization too long ago to mention, one of the challenges that we had was how do you create a Friday afternoon culture where if you have a salesperson, they have a choice. They've worked 50 hours. They can either build a new display or they can go home. And if the culture is they build the new display and everyone across the organization does that, it's like a 5% overnight lift on revenue growth. At Frito-Lay, at least, we believe that nothing happened until somebody sold something. So there was no one there telling them what to go do, but it was a combination of expectations around performance, around compensation incentives, around kind of who moved in the organization and who didn't, all of which kind of drove the behavior so that the company sales force would continue to to grow and do so in an efficient way where you could add a lot of capacity to the sales system without adding in a bunch of additional costs by how you went through that. It's interesting. I had a conversation earlier this week with someone, and it was about an opportunity that they were pitching me, and it was kind of an interesting one. The person says, we want to make sure we don't change the culture. We've had leaders who have been in roles for a long period of time. We want to have a nice overlap between kind of the old guard or the new guard so that we don't change the culture. So what do you think my question was? Two
What's your
parts.
culture?
What's your culture and why don't you want to change it? And it was kind of a guppy mouth look on the recruiter's face because he we want to do good by employees. That was the purpose for the culture. And that's wonderful.
But you know,
What's the
Jackson,
business driver behind
there,
that though?
right there, though, I think that for me, that reveals a lack of understanding on that person's part about what culture is, because they're using that term to mean how people feel about working there. That's not culture, right? Culture is about behaviors that drive the business and confidence when you're executing those. So I just think that person just doesn't get it.
I agree. Because look, if you have a strong culture, it's about aligning teams, it's about accelerating decisions, it's about attracting A players, which, as you know, I think is a cumulative effect. A players want to work with and around and for other A players. And it ensures that people bring their best selves to work. That is culture. As long as those things are driving a defined and clear business outcome. And there could be cultures that don't fit that narrative well. There are conversations where it doesn't fit the narrative well because you have a set of we wants around culture that don't actually link into the so that's on the other side of it. And as I was talking to this person, who's really good human being, I'm sure his parents love him and everything. But in terms of the attractiveness for an A player who can't talk about here's why the culture matters to us, here's what is most important, and here are the business outcomes of that. As some might disagree, but I think I might be an A player. It was a complete turnoff to the point where I said, I just don't think this is the right fit. Why? Because I think that there's a definition of people like working there. There's not a definition of so that we can do these wonderful purpose-driven things. So,
Well,
so
and to like to make sure that we're not misunderstood, and I know you feel this same way. Both of us want to build organizations where people like working there, right?
oh,
It's
of
not that
course,
that's not
yeah,
the antithesis of anything. It's just not what culture means. And to be deliberate and intentional about something, you have to get down to what it really is, and then you can get on to who's responsible for it, which I think we should talk about, and what can you do about it, and especially what do you do about it as a people leader, as a CHRO in an organization. So go with my question, man. Who's responsible? Who takes care of culture?
yeah. Ultimately, I think we are stewards of it, but the definition starts and ends with the CEO, and more broadly, the executive leadership team, where we as I step into new roles or as I have clients that I end up playing with for a little bit, one of the first things I do is walk them through an exercise that defines their talent philosophy. And what is it that we want to recognize and reinforce so that we can drive certain performance outcomes. And it's always been shocking to me. And it's happened, I'd even say the majority of the time where you have folks that want to know the rules, even other officers of the company, they want to know the rules, but they don't want to define or they struggle defining why we need the rule, which is in fact the culture we're trying to drive and reinforce. I saw you nodding. I'm assuming you agree that CEO is
I,
on point.
I agree with it, but I think you could drive a truck through the term talent philosophy. Be a little bit more specific. What have you meant by that as you practice that?
Yeah. So I think it's kind of the rules of the road as to how you manage and drive talent. So you might think about how fast do you expect people to spin up? How do you want to balance the what and the how in terms of how you recognize performance? It is around the degrees to which there are behavioral norms, like with managers. Whose job is it to develop direct reports? Now, I think you and I would laugh at that and say, well, of course it's the manager. That's their accountability. I've done this exercise with folks, and more times than I can even begin to understand. The answer isn't the manager. It is some HR function, or it's a training group if it's not there. Well, if you can't define those basic tenets of who is accountable for managing your people, I can't create systems and incentives that drive forward in those. So, for example, if I have a organization that thinks HR is the one that will develop people, and I have one that believes that frontline managers are going to develop people, and I'm the human capital leader, I have two different programs that I'm going to be driving underneath. One will lead to a much more frontline orientation, and one is going to be much more, yeah, I would argue, entertainment value, because I kind of don't think that the centralized development of people work, but that's a bias that I have. There are others that disagree with that, and so it's about uh, you know, do you want to how do you want to share your financial incentives? So do you give, if you had a 5 point scale, what's the difference between what you give a three and what you give a five, both in terms of the quantum of it, but also in terms of the timing associated with it? So it's making sure that leadership teams are aligned on how we want to treat talent. That then allows you to drive the kind of things that we need to build to support from an HR perspective, but equally important, helps the organization really focus in on making fast muscle memory kind of decisions on stuff, which comes right back to it's aligning around teams and accelerating decisions.
To try and build on what you just said and make it tangible, like super tangible to the audience. Look, the question of who develops people becomes then a question of who you put in managerial roles. Because
Yeah.
if the role of that, right, and that's why that talent philosophy is so critically important for the CHRO to lead the conversation on. Because if our philosophy is going to be frontline managers are the developers of the behaviors that we want, then nobody goes into a management role because they're good at doing the job. Everybody goes in because they're good at developing the people, and then we want the highest level of skill that we can get in that role. That then becomes something that if you're making decisions around that and employees are watching you make those decisions, that does become a part of culture because now they're seeing it in operation. It becomes an expectation, and confidence goes up because they know that they can count on the people that get those roles are the people that fill the following bill.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And look, just because the CEO kind of is the ultimate driver of culture, um, doesn't mean that we don't have a really important role in developing systems in support of it. And it doesn't mean that other leaders don't own the expectation to model and reinforce, within those, within that confine. We still guide and facilitate, but leadership has to drive the culture very actively. And I've said it now on a couple podcasts and a few things I've written. If you want to know what your culture is, don't look at the pretty things that you have on the wall. Don't look at the laminated business card that we handed out on during onboarding to uh, our new employees. Audit the last 100 decisions you made. What did you do? How did you do it? Why did you do it? That's your culture.
And those don't always have to be financial decisions, right?
Why have I promoted somebody? Why did I? I'm in the middle of driving a fairly large communication effort in my organization. Who did I pick to be a part of it and why? Like, yeah, it's all your decisions. If you audit them, you'll know what your culture is faster than just about any other.
So what's the order of operation? Let's say that I am a CHRO in a sort of mid-market company. I did the audit and I have an understanding of how we would define our culture by those last 100 decisions, and I don't like it. And it's not what I want. What advice do you give me?
I think you need to start with clarity. And I'm kind of an evangelist on this point. This is one where I think you and I are of like mind. Otherwise, we wouldn't be hanging out together. The difference between you and me is you created a company to try to help us with that. So a shameless plug. I think you got to start with being so clear on what the role's outcomes need to be. And if you do that well, you will very, very quickly enable everything else to work easier. If I've identified the 3 to 5 things, heck, start with 3. If you have none, start with 3. What are the macro things that you will hold this person accountable? And if you're in a managerial role, you should define what the managerial aspects of it are as well. There are outcomes associated with that. If you want to define what the organization looks like in the future, you start with what are the outcomes you think are most important. From there, it is evaluating the current state, identifying the gaps, and then prioritizing the actions that are necessary to drive those outcomes. I think if you start any place but that, you'll find yourself in a disconnect between where you are and where you want to be, which will require you to go back and start again with clarity. And I've learned that lesson, unfortunately, the hard way.
Well, you know the support I have for the idea of designing roles and being thoughtful and intentional. It's the basis of one of the products that we just launched. But I'd add a step that I didn't hear from you, which is that before we can define the roles, we've got to have something that we're defining them around. And so the exercise that I think the CHROs should be doing with their CEOs is, let's get to the 3 to 5 things that you really want in this company. Assume that there are no, that there's no limits. Like, what's your vision, CEO, for how people in the company are behaving? And I like to caution them up front. Like, be careful what we're defining in, because we're about to go build systems and you're about to hold your leadership team accountable to these things. Have that conversation with the CEO first, and then facilitate it as the CEO is leading that conversation with the executive team.
Yeah, I didn't mean to skip that. I assumed that away, but that's absolutely the first place to start. And it's not only about how they behave; it's about how you want to set your company up. I think I was when I had my firm about a decade ago. One of our clients was coming to us asking, "Help us define the people strategy," and it became really obvious within the first 10 minutes that there was not a clear business strategy. They had an interesting regulatory obstacle that they had to work through. They could not have a national approach to the product that they were selling. They had to do everything within a state bound within those kind of legal frameworks. And so they were like, help us figure out what that organization needs to look like. And the first question I asked is, okay, are you trying to be a premium player in the market, or are you trying to be a value player? And the CEO said, well, why does that matter? Because I'm going to create 2 completely different organizations for that. Okay. So even really good, successful, and this person happened to be a founder and quite innovative. We don't always think through, even at the top level, kind of the clarity of what am I trying to accomplish? And it's hard because you can then get caught up in everything. And you get into the circular reference and you don't know how to get out. But to your earlier point, how you end up starting the conversation of what you are trying to build, which ought to include some element of market penetration, product market fit, financial performance, individual and enterprise people performance. All of that matters. And if you can tie everything into those 3 to 5 things, where if they do these things right now and only these things, we're going to have an A player in that role, and we're going to be focused in on the right directions. Life gets easier after that.
Jetson, I think like some guys like us who have built really strong executive team relationships, it might feel easier sometimes than to someone who hasn't done that before. And I think if I was giving advice to a CHRO that felt less confident about that, going and asking some of those questions rather than trying to lead your CEO, asking the CEO to explain some of those things to you is a good starting point. One, because it shows an interest in the business. And two, because it gives you the opportunity to ask questions around them, which is going to reveal areas that are going to be ultimately important. And it's always easier to bring something to somebody's attention with a question than a statement, you know? And recognizing that you're going to have maybe not just one conversation, but a number of conversations with your CEO about what you want the culture to be and how you're going to observe it and what you're going to be willing to reinforce. And I think the best question I've ever asked is, are you willing to sacrifice profit for that? If you aren't willing to sacrifice profit for it, it ain't worth much, right? But when you are, then you know you're really committed to it.
Yeah, I think there's probably a time element to how how long you're willing to sacrifice profit, because over time, it should all end up in the P&L. But that sparked the question that I've asked, which I think is also super helpful. Let's presume for the moment that you have clarity on what those 3 to 5 things are. The next step that I take is, let's do a pre-mortem. Now, this pre-mortem process has a couple elements to it that are pretty fun. And you get whatever population that you want to include in there. In this case, let's pretend it's senior levels. And you ask them to put on their general counsel hat and look at everything skeptically, as if it's not going to work. And then have them define why it's not going to work. And when they define it's not going to work, what you'll find is, here are all the things we need to go work on. And inherent, either directly or indirectly, they will come back to talent initiatives, because at the root cause, if you have a business challenge, it is either a strategy challenge or an executional challenge. And in both cases, the root cause of both is you have a talent challenge. So not necessarily the wrong ones, but do you have the skills in the right place, driving the right things, organized the right way? And the second part about that process that is really helpful, I found, is it is a wonderful alignment tool, because everyone is afraid to do something different. Some people are more comfortable acknowledging that, but everybody is. Change isn't about not wanting to go forward. It's about holding on to where you've been. And so you have to give people the opportunity to verbalize the loss that they are feeling from where they've been to where they're headed. And this process works wonders in that way too. So you do the pre-mortem. That allows you to get a very good taxonomy of things you need to go work on. And 2, it's a huge cultural alignment mechanism, because it gives people the ability to share and verbalize what is holding them back to being fully committed. And what I found is, more often than not, that process, it shapes the work going forward and aligns the executive team in ways that otherwise they wouldn't.
So check me on this, because I don't know whether we see this aspect the same or not. I think if you're going to start working on culture, again, big word, right? Don't try and work on everything. I say, if you're going to focus on one thing, if you're trying to change the culture in your organization, work first on getting everybody on the same page in terms of, how do we define the term culture, who's responsible, and why is that person or those people responsible, and what are the things that we're willing to do to reinforce? What decisions can we make for ourselves at the most senior level? I think that's where you start. There's plenty more to work on, but if you can get that stuff right, you've at least got a solid foundation to build on. You agree, disagree, see it differently?
No, I totally agree with you. And in fact, this is the part of the podcast where we talk about, it's the wrap up time. So for anyone who's been multitasking, just hit back 30 seconds and listen to what Scott just said, because
it's the only 30 seconds of value, right?
No. The whole thing's valuable. I'm just saying that the last 30 seconds was impactful. Now you need to go back 60 seconds. With that, let me just tell you, we are so grateful that you took an opportunity to spend time with us today. And I hope you were able to get some value from it. And if you did, please consider sharing it with a friend and colleague who might also benefit from it. And while you're here, like and subscribe, whether it's on YouTube or on the podcast place of choice. That's how the algorithm works. We get more people to see us, and everything good comes from that. And if you're looking for more insights and dive deeper into the future of work, you can find that over at my Substack at talentsherpa.substack.com. And if you want some help on kind of driving the outcomes orientation of your organization, head on over to see Scott at Propulsion AI. So with that, keep on leading, keep adapting, and keep on climbing.